Welcome, everybody, to our Coach's Corner podcast. Today, we're going to be talking with head coach Bobby Perez from Emory Baseball, and the topic is, what do you need from a recruit to recruit and commit them? Coach Perez has been at Emory since 2008, first for an impressive 15 years as an assistant coach under the longtime 25-year Emory head coach Twardowski, and then was named the head coach in 2024 to succeed as I believe, the third head coach in program history. In his time at Emory, Coach Perez has helped lead the program to 5 NCAA tournament berths, 3 College World Series appearances, and in 2014, national runner-up, second place finish in the College World Series, and also 6 UAA conference championships. So when people think of Emory, I think, the known quantity is certainly the incredibly high academics, the incredibly high prestige of a school like Emory in the Southeast, and also an incredibly high level of Division III college baseball, which is awesome. So, Coach Perez, thank you so much for being on here today and for sharing some insights with families.
Thanks for having me, Max. I'm looking forward to it.
So to jump right in, at a program like Emory with the high level of academics plus the high level of baseball, what's the timeline that you tend to be working with for recruits? When do you tend to first see players, and then what are the kind of waypoints along the way where you continue the conversation and then finalize that process for your incoming classes?
Sure. I think first and foremost, we're always open and willing to look at players regardless of class, regardless of age. Now the priority and the focus changes from grad year to grad year, and depending on how young guys get, because again, how early we can start the process at Emory, it matters depending on how much schooling you've completed and those sorts of things. But we're always willing and looking, regardless of age. In general, our process starts in the spring or in January of their junior year. For instance, with the 2026 class, we'll start to turn our attention to them here in the springtime, as they've sort of now completed 2.5 years of high school, going into their second semester of junior year. And so that's when we sort of really can turn our focus to them. Once they've completed those 3 years of high school academically, we've seen them athletically some, and possibly in the summer between their junior and senior year. We can sort of begin to tell what trend academically they're on, and then athletically if they're a fit, and everything that goes into that. Starting much sooner than that, for us, it just doesn't hold a lot of advantages. There's too many unknowns, and there's too many ways that it can go. And I don't think it's a good use of our time nor the student athlete's time, because there's just still too much time, too many hurdles to jump before we kind of get to that good place. So for us, the spring of their junior year is a good place to start, leading into that summer between their junior and senior year. And then, into the fall of their senior year as we start to get to admissions deadlines, later on in that year.
So it sounds like one important piece of the puzzle for you to efficiently move forward with recruits is, let's say, 2.5 years to 3 years of a high school transcript. Is that fair to say? Like, having the first semester grades from junior year is an important kind of part of the timeline, where now when a player sends you stuff, you have more of a file to go on and kind of start to think through the admissions from the academic side of things?
Yeah, I think so, unofficially.
Yeah.
2.5 years is unofficially what we would need to see. We cannot do anything with our, admissions department until they've completed their junior year. But unofficially taking a look at things, 2.5 years minimally. And then, as we sort of get deeper into the process, and get a little bit more serious about that, we're now looking into the summer after you've completed 3 years of high school.
Yeah, having that it's funny, in talking with a lot of high academic programs, I think that trend makes sense, right? Like, being able to go over to admissions with a full 3 years of a high school transcript is one of the important pieces in getting something like a pre-read or a firmer commitment, and for coaches knowing that they're able to have conversations with these players and know that they aren't being inefficient. They're not gonna, you know, they're not going to be wasting their time talking to a player who they love on the field, but who's only has, you know, 1.5 years of a high school transcript is tough to work with at a school, at a high academic program where admissions is so reliant on the academic piece as well.
Yeah, that's correct. And you know, especially for us, can't speak for everybody, but for us, that is where we sort of start the process, because again, you know, look, there's sort of, we look at it in three sort of avenues, right? There's the athletic piece. Can they play baseball for us at a high level? You know, academically, can they get into school? Can they succeed academically here with all of its challenges? And then obviously the third piece is sort of the financial piece, being a Division III institution, no athletic scholarship. So those three things sort of always have to sort of be in concert for us to move forward in the recruiting process. And so, you know, academically speaking, you know, we have to have sort of a track record, and there has to be something on the transcripts to kind of show us that we can move forward in the process.
Before players have that 3 years of a high school transcript, before they have that full file that they need to like concretely move forward with your program, whether it's because they only have, you know, part of that transcript, or they don't have their test scores yet, or whatever it is, the piece of the puzzle that they might be missing, what can they do before that to advance their recruiting and you know, stay in touch with you? Or, you know, what should they be doing before they have that academic track record to continue to advance their recruiting early on to get ahead of it?
Well, I always encourage young players to be their own advocate. Reach out. Again, send the information that you do have that's available. It doesn't mean that we can do much with it in an official way, but we're always sort of cataloging and storing those pieces of information, watching video, keeping tabs on transcripts, things like that, just to know, like, okay, this is eventually going to come due, right? I mean, we're eventually going to get to this piece where, okay, this certain grad year is going to be our priority. I guess it's more just with the understanding, depending on which school you're reaching out to, what their timeline is. If you're a 2028 right now and you're reaching out to Emory, you know, there's just nothing we can do. And so you know, as long as you're understanding that I'm reaching out, I'm just trying to put myself out there, you know, kind of get the process started, but you're not reaching back out to me. Well, you know, again, there's just not a whole lot we can do other than sort of catalog it, keep track of it. And then as it gets closer to the time that's a priority for us, now we sort of know, hey, you have some interest. You know, we need to try and get a chance to see you if we haven't already, and all of those sorts of things. But again, being your own best advocate, putting it out there to places that you're interested in attending, possibly, it never hurts to reach out. And I think that, you know, most coaches and most staffs like ours, you know, they keep tabs of that stuff, put it into a file, keep it on record. And again, as it becomes, you know, the priority for that particular program, you know, then they go back and kind of go through all that information.
One thing that you mentioned earlier as well that I would love to kind of double click on is I think there is a perception from some parents, from some student athletes that, well, if it's not my grad year's, you know, quote unquote turn, then coaches aren't paying attention to me. They aren't watching me. What you said earlier, I think, was interesting, where you said, you know, we are still watching 27s and 28s, but what we're able to do with them is different. Like this coming summer, the conversation that you have and the next action steps with the 2026 are certainly different than they are with a 27 or a 28. But is that to say, like, what are you at an event like Head First, or at a travel ball tournament, if you're down at, you know, if you're at a travel tournament or something, where are your eyeballs drawn when you're looking at a 26, 27, 28? Like, what are the different kind of activities coming out of that for you?
Well, I think first and foremost, you know, when we're recruiting, you know, we are looking for something specific, depending on, you know, again, what sort of event we're at. If we're at a Head First event where you can kind of, you know, again, it's a little more of a measured, paced out event, we can watch everybody showcase we're taking notes, we're looking at, sort of the same things, whether a guy has good hands, good feet, good actions, good arm strength, those sort of raw baseball abilities that sort of can transcend grad year. A 27 with a very good arm or a 26 with a very good arm, it looks the same in a lot of ways if the arm is really good. You go to a tournament, a travel ball showcase, or a travel ball, game. A lot of times, college coaches are there to see a guy or two for the most part. So again, you don't see that as much because you're focused in on seeing somebody play. And then in a live game situation, it's just a little bit different because it's not as controlled. You're trying to focus in on what they're doing because they might be the center fielder, and you could sit there and watch for 5 innings and there's not a single ball hit to that center fielder, but you're watching how he gets ready in between pitches, how he gets on and off the field, how he interacts with his teammates. And so you sort of focus in on that player, those 2 players, those 3 players that you're really there to see, because that environment's a lot less controlled. And obviously you're focusing in on their at bats because again, those things just, so some of the events differ in what it is you're trying to look at. And if I'm, going to a travel ball game, is my focus as much going to be on younger guys that, no, not necessarily. It's going to be more on the guys I need to see, but in a showcase sort of environment where things are a little more, laid out in a little more of an organized fashion, a little more of a set pattern. It's easy to see guys that you're not necessarily locked in on for that particular grad year, if that makes sense. It's some notes on those younger guys and getting a chance to see them for the first time and sort of cataloging them, knowing, hey, it's going to come back around here shortly.
Yeah, I love that. I think that getting on radars early can benefit, but also it requires that understanding of the patience of, this process is gonna move at a different pace at different programs at a school like Emory versus a different D3 school down the road versus certainly at the Division I level. That's interesting insight.
I'd love to also add one more point to that, Max. And, I think getting on the radar early can be helpful. I don't think it's also necessarily everybody develops at their own pace at their own time, right? So just because it's not, you didn't have the greatest tournament as a 15-year-old sophomore in high school, and it's like, oh, what's going to happen next? And you don't need to worry about that as much. There's time. It's not. It's not. Sometimes that exposure early helps because those nerves and playing in front of college coaches, that exposure in a less pressure-packed environment can be good. So, I know for us, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the radar as a 15-year-old, and now we're tracking you as a 17-year-old. There are plenty of guys that we've seen for the first time as 17-year-old juniors in high school. And again, we recruit nationally. The school, wants the geographical diversity, and there's a lot of things that go into play with that. So we don't always get a chance to see guys, but once or twice. So they weren't necessarily on the radar early, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely makes sense. I mean, that getting kids on the radar before that they could be a good fit for Emory is, that's maybe not the most efficient use of your recruiting time when you're thinking about, all right, what do I need to do to keep the success of this program going? That's looking at kids at the right time. Certainly makes sense. What is the information, the combination of athletic, academic, character, culture fit that you need to see from players as you recruit them and as you commit them? And is there kind of a preferred or ideal order of operations in when and how players present to you, potential recruits present those different pieces of the puzzle?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little science to that. There's a little art to that. The science piece of it, sort of just looking at it in sort of raw numbers academically, the transcripts, the test scores, some of those things that, again, we're sort of getting a first glimpse at. Does that fit? Does that piece of the puzzle possibly fit? There's the athletic piece, which is not necessarily scientific. There are metrics and numbers and certain things, but obviously you're watching guys play. You think they're a fit. The style of baseball they play may be something that we like to do or that somebody else likes to do. Obviously, there's a positional need year to year for us. It's not always we're going to recruit a catcher and a first baseman and a second baseman and a third base. Some years we need a couple infielders, some years we don't. Some years we need an outfielder, some years we don't. So that's obviously year to year, that varies. The character fit, the cultural fit, those are things I think we develop as we start to meet them, as we start the process, as you watch them play in certain events, as you talk to high school coaches, as you talk to travel ball coaches, as you reach out to, guidance counselors, some of those things that you're trying to get a little bit of background information on, because that is important for our program. We believe that that's, a very big piece of the puzzle. School's tough. We demand a lot on the baseball field. We want guys that, want to be a part of this and, understand that it's going to, be tough both ways. So that character and cultural fit are important for us. But again, that's a sort of an art piece that sort of develops over some time. To say how much, if about 100%, how much each of those factors into each equation, that's almost impossible to say, because again, it's just some of it's a feel thing, some of it's as you're starting to get to know them. And listen, there's people that don't feel comfortable with us per se, if that makes sense, right? Like, or the university as they visit, they kind of like, oh, this is the place for me. Maybe it's not the place for me. So all of those things factor into it that just sort of take time throughout the recruiting process, but they're all very important pieces of the puzzle. But again, I think if in general, the first couple things you're looking for are sort of those three core areas that we talked about a little bit earlier: the athletic piece, the academic piece, the financial piece. Okay, is that something that those things possibly line up? And now we move forward in the process, start to get to know everybody a little bit, maybe possibly have you visit all of those things depending on the level of interest.
I think that one thing that your answers I rightly highlight is it's different from program to program, it's different from year to year, and it's different from player to player. Like, there isn't one kind of standard out of the box, this is how the recruiting process works, full stop, period, right? Like, that doesn't sound like it's the reality. It's very individualized for Emory versus even a school that might look very similar, or this kid versus this other kid, or from 2024 to 2025. Like, is it fair to say that it changes year over year depending on your needs, the individual kid, school to school, all those pieces?
Yeah, I think the timing of it for us is fairly similar year to year. I think a lot of the general standards are similar year to year, but yes, positional need changes year to year. How we go about it doesn't really change, but I can't tell you that every year I need a first baseman. So that doesn't, again, that's just sort of, again, there's some of those things that you can't control as a player, at a certain program. I think our process, for the most part, stays fairly consistent. Our timing stays fairly consistent. But again, just how those needs work and how we go about it, I think is fairly consistent, at least as long as I've been here at Emory. But again, just how, positionally what you need and those sorts of things. Again, yes, that can absolutely vary year to year because we're not recruiting a brand new team every year.
But when it comes to those things that do stay consistent, or at least fairly consistent year over year, things like, you're always looking for the top academic kids, you're always looking for kids who can play, you're always looking for the cultural fit, and the timeline roughly tracks year over year. This might be an unfair question, but what would you say is kind of the quote unquote average recruiting process? Like, kids who end up committing to Emory or end up being recruited by Emory, when you typically first saw them, when you typically started exchanging emails with them, when you typically talk to them face to face, like, is there some kind of rubric or calendar that you could point to that's like, generally it works like this, understanding that there's a lot of room for variability for all these different reasons that we talked about?
Yeah, I mean, there is obviously some variability, and some of that can be also, just geographical. Obviously we can see kids that are close enough geographically to us earlier than we can see kids further away. But for the most part, we try to get through the summer between your junior and senior year, maybe into about September 1st, of doing a lot of evaluation, and then sort of moving forward with what we want the class to look like in general. Obviously, a lot of the kids we're talking to are making decisions on a lot of different places. It's not just, very rarely am I recruiting the certain player that I want, and Emory's the only place he wants to go, and that's it. And there's nobody else recruiting him. So, they want to take visits. They want to weigh their options and what they find as a fit for them, academically, cultural, geographically, all those things. But we kind of have a pretty good understanding by about Labor Day of where we're headed with that class. It doesn't mean that there's not spots open, because, but again, most of the time kids are back in school for their senior year. A lot of the summer ball circuit stuff is over. Our guys are back on campus. Fall baseball gets started for us not too long after. So, some of the in-person evaluation stuff, especially nationally, gets a little bit tougher for us at that point in time. So, again, in general, that junior spring into that summer between your junior and senior year, and then basically leading into school starting your senior year, is kind of, the big evaluation time for us with each class, knowing that we've now completed 3 years of high school, and we can sort of find that trend as well, and kind of go from there.
You've talked a little bit about it a couple times, the kind of the character piece has come up to it. Obviously, at a place like Emory, incredibly good baseball, incredibly good academics. In addition to those pieces, how do you assess character fit, cultural fit, team chemistry? Like, what are the other pieces that you're looking for in a player, in those kind of the quote unquote soft skills, or some of the off field, off transcript pieces of fit? What are the things that you're generally looking for there, and how do you assess them?
Yeah, I mean, I think assessing them is not always easy. But again, how they interact with you on the phone, how do they interact with teammates at events that you see them play, how do they get on and off the field in between innings? I mean, there's just certain things. How do they interact with their travel ball coach during the game? How do they react when they strike out, looking on a called third strike that, might not have been a strike? So those are all sort of different things that you're kind of watching for, that, kind of, as you referred, soft skills. They're not things that really, are baseball related in a sense. And so you can kind of tell there's some body language things. Then obviously, as you get further along, they possibly come visit. There's always a reason that, we meet with them, obviously, but we also have our players meet with them, and they can give some feedback as to, how did they treat you? And because I know our guys, are going to, be respectful and treat them visiting. So, there's a lot of different sort of tells, and different situations that you kind of can see or put them in. They give you some pretty good feedback.
Yeah. That's such an interesting piece to me, because I think that I think a lot of players who are approaching their recruiting process, they are thinking about, okay, what is the school fit like? Is it the right size? Like, they're thinking about the pieces of the school. And many of them are also thinking about the fit with the coaching staff that's recruiting them. But I think that emphasis on what is the locker room that I'm walking into? What's the bus that I'm on? Like, who are my teammates? And I think that getting a sense of that can be such an important piece, both for coaches, but then also for players, to get a sense of, is this the right holistic fit for me as a program? One of the key pieces of that is the people around you on that team, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think guys liking to play with each other make you play better, So, look, talent matters, obviously, and catching and throwing the baseball and hitting the baseball matter, but it's pretty amazing how you will do those things better when you want to do it with a group of guys that you enjoy playing with. You spend a lot of time together. Is it kumbaya every single day of the week? Obviously, it's not. but at the same time, if there's just a general sort of enjoyment for the group of guys that you're playing with, then the level of play is going to go up. And it's a big part of our program, of what Coach T did for a lot of years here, that I was fortunate enough to be a part of as an assistant, and that we would like to keep going, obviously. So it's again, it's a tough thing to define. I mean, it's you can sit there and go to a Barnes and Noble and go into your business leadership section of the bookstore, and people have written bookshelves of books about all of that stuff, and it's it's impossible to define. You don't really, you just do the best you can. But again, that guys wanting to play for each other make a big difference. I mean, there's not a Super Bowl champ or a World Series champ that says, no, we all hated each other in this locker room, but we were the best team. It just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. It's interesting. One conversation I had with Greg DeCenzo at one point, who used to be the head coach at Holy Cross, is now in the minor leagues. He said every season ends, and it's going to end with tears. If you have built a program, everyone should be crying in that locker room, because it's the last chance you have to play with some of these guys. Like, those relationships matter, right? Like, and that emotion is a display of those relationships mattering, and your buy-in with your teammates, and all that network of relationships that you've built in that team, with coaching staffs, with your teammates, all across the board.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in college, most of the time, you get guys for 4 years, but no team's ever the same. Graduating seniors, new group of freshmen, or transfers, or whatever, new players each year. No team is ever the same. Even if you return a bunch of players or lose a bunch of players. I mean, we have these conversations. How are you going to be this year? Well, if I knew that, I mean, we think you always feel pretty good, but it's different every single year, and that's part of the beauty of coaching and the challenge that comes along with it. And so, but it's still, you try and build that foundation culturally, so that fresh start isn't from the bottom, if that makes sense, right? Like, you're trying to have that culture of how you want things to get done, how guys, how you expect things to be done, guys, what they expect out of themselves. And so that it just kind of manifests each year, and you're not quite starting from zero, you're starting from a little higher up again, to then hopefully get to where you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. That what are the pieces of the culture that you're returning year over year that are like the pillars, the foundation that you then build each team iteration, or kind of each version year over year on. I love that way of thinking about it. That's fantastic. To head into the lightning round. So lightning round, 4 questions that are a little bit kind of quicker response, 1 or 2 words, 1 or 2 sentences, whatever comes to mind. What is a question that you think recruits should be asking more during their recruiting process that you don't hear enough?
I think the question about the team culture is one that I think should be asked, and probably needs to be almost on their side sort of dove into a little bit more. There's a lot of questions about school and balancing everything, but that culture piece helps all of those things in a very roundabout way, and it probably is not asked as often as one would think.
Yeah, I love that. What is the pitch to a recruit that you're interested? What makes Emory unique?
Well, I think first and foremost, and sort of just the most surface level, is the combination of athletics, academics, and our geographical location. There's not as many schools, the density of really high academic institutions in the South as there are in certain other parts of the country. And I think that piece of it is very attractive to student athletes. And that's something that, again, we do highlight, obviously. And I think that's very attractive to them.
Yeah. One of the things, it's a bigger school than a lot of student body wise than a lot of kind of Division three, high academic Division 3 programs that are out there as well. No.
You know, I believe so. I mean, we're about 6,500 undergraduate, and you can double that with grad schools and professional schools. So, I mean, we're like 13,000 students when everybody's on campus at one time. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, it's probably bigger than most people realize.
Yeah. Interesting. What is an off-field action, habit, or interaction that stands out to you and gets a kid's name highlighted right away on your recruiting sheet? You're at a tournament, you're at a showcase, you see a kid do X, and you say, I like that kid. I got to go talk to him.
Probably two things. I mean, I love guys that that hustle. It takes no talent. And I don't mean that it's 100% on and off the field, but it's, you know, it's always with a brisk pace, right? There's always sort of a little bit of an urgency without hurrying, if that makes sense. But there's a right way to play the game, and they always are moving at a good pace. They run out the baseball. All of those things matter. It always stands out. I think it's a little bit of a lost art. And then also just sort of, not even sort of, just their interactions with people, especially at certain events where they don't know anybody. And again, not everybody's personality is super outgoing, but at the same time, you know, a little bit of friendliness, a little bit of the ability to put yourself out there a little bit, say hello, talk to somebody you don't know, get to know them. Those things sort of stand out. It shows some confidence.
Yeah. The number one thing you look at first on the field in a potential recruit?
That's a good question. You know, some of it depends on position. Some of it depends on, you know, but you know, the way they carry themselves, you can tell a lot just from a guy how they sort of their mannerisms, their body language, and how they move around. Obviously, those things stand out. You know, you try never to judge any book by its cover before. You know, you don't want to sit there and be like, oh, well, this body type really stands out. Well, of course, if you have a great physical physique and you look like Mike Trout when we walk out there and see you, that's gonna stand out. But again, most of the young 16, 17-year-old kids, that's not what it's going to be. So, you know, just the way they carry themselves before they kind of, you know, get out there to play, you kind of pay attention a little bit of that, and then, you know, you let their actions speak for themselves when they get out on the field.
Love that. That's the end of the lightning round. So, Coach Perez, thank you so much for taking some time and sharing your insights about a great program, as you pointed out, unique, if not singular, in the Southeast in terms of its combination of high level Division 3 baseball and incredible academics. Thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us.
Thank you, Max. I appreciate it.